Welcome to the Successful Athletes Podcast presented by TrainerRoad, where we interview successful athletes to make you a faster cyclist. And this week, we're going to be talking about triathlon instead of cycling because we have a triathlete with us here, Sika Henry. What's up, Sika?
Hi, how are you?
Doing awesome. I'm excited to do this one. We've been in touch I've been following you for a handful of years now, and your progress. You've used TrainerRoad for years, and that's, of course, how I've gotten to know who you are and had the privilege of following you throughout your career so far. But today we're going to talk all about your journey and what you've done to achieve your form of success. And this is going to be a great episode because I think it's going to have applications and takeaways for everybody. We're going to talk about your background in sport, going into triathlon, and then also, of course, talk about the fact that you really buck the demographic trend for this sport as well. And I believe you have a really positive impact and leadership role in this sport that you're fulfilling well, and that you are a Black woman in a predominantly male and white sport. So we'll get to talk about that and all that we can do as listeners to this podcast to make this sport more inclusive, increase racial representation, just make it more welcoming for everybody too. So, but let's start first, Sika, with back in college, you were actually a high jumper, which doesn't have direct relation to triathlon. So what made you get into high jump?
Yeah. High jump to Ironman. I was a swimmer all 4 years of high school. And my senior year, I was burnt out, didn't want to keep swimming. I wasn't even that great at it. And I still wanted to stay active and try a new sport. So the outdoor season of my senior year of high school, I was playing basketball and the track coach saw me jump really high. And he was like, you should come out for the track team. You'd probably be a great high jumper. And I didn't really know much about it. But the first time that I jumped, I cleared like 5.2, which is pretty good for somebody's first time in a high school. Yep. So I did track and field. My senior year of high school, I had already gotten to Tufts University at that point. So I contacted the track coach, Kristen Morwick, who actually had the high jump school record for Dartmouth. So she had a really extensive background in high jump. Yeah. So it was pretty ironic that I had already gotten in there. So I walked onto the track and field team and I just got better every year. I started running like sub 60 in the 400. She wanted to turn me into a pentathlete or a heptathlete, but the 800 was the last event. And I'm like, there's no way I'm running that long. So like, I was never, endurance and me did not mix. I'm like, no, the less running I have to do, the better. So it's funny that I do marathons and stuff now. So that's how I got into high jump.
There's a few questions that come to mind. Firstly, and this possibly seems tangential and unrelated, perhaps even just like entertaining a personal question for me, but did you jump backwards the first time when you high jumped over that bar? Because the traditional way to high jump, if anybody doesn't know, is you jump and you actually go over it on your backwards. It's kind of like a quarter backflip in the sense that you land on your back on a pad.
Yep.
Was that scary at all to get used to that? Did you just go into it and do it?
No, not at all.
Thing?
That was all I knew. Yeah. If anything, I was more afraid trying to like scissor kick or go forward. But no, I think that's primarily now how people learn is by doing the Fosbury flop, which is going back. So no, I wasn't scared. It's not like pole vault. Like if I had to do the pole vault, that would have freaked me out.
Right. Yeah. That falling backwards thing can be so scary for a lot of people, jumping and going through that experience. So that's an interesting one. The next question that I have for that too is focusing in on the huge difference between short and very intense. I mean, high jump is a short endurance or short and athletic endeavor versus where you're at now with, you did Kona, Kona's such, a long day, everything else.
Right.
Did you like short stuff because it's what you did and that's all you knew? Or did you like short stuff for other reasons?
It wasn't painful, like I would watch one of my roommates, she was 5K, did cross country and stuff. And, Saturday night I'd be going to bed, drunk and she'd have to get up Sunday morning and go out for these 14, 15 mile runs. I'm like, that's insane. And, I'd watch them, do the 5K, 10K on the track, all those laps. And it just looked grueling to me. I had no interest in it. I went to college up in Boston. That's where Tufts University is. And I watched the Boston Marathon every year and just seeing everybody out there like dying on Heartbreak Hill. I just wanted no part of it. So no, it wasn't until years later I was like, all right, let me see what this is all about.
So that curiosity you had, is that what pushed you to do eventually triathlons?
Yeah. I guess in some ways I did grow up around marathons. I'm originally from New York, watched the New York City Marathon growing up. And yeah, I think like most people, it something I added to my bucket list. Like, let me say that I did one marathon. And I hadn't even done like a 10K. I hadn't done a half marathon, and I just signed up for a full marathon, the Atlantic City Marathon. And I did train for it. I started getting into like runs and doing some 5Ks and stuff like that. And, but I didn't prepare properly, and it was a miserable experience for me. I went out entirely way too fast. That's the sprinter in me. I went out too fast. I've learned to be patient over the years, but I think around like 17, I was walking, I started puking. I was just like in agony. There was a spectator on the side of the road, and she had a cell phone. I stopped. I asked if I could use it. I called my best friend who was at the race, like for me, so that she could come pick me up. So I didn't have to finish the race, but she didn't answer. So then I had to finish the marathon. But somehow I broke 4 hours. So I was like, okay, I think that's how fast I gone out actually. So yeah, I broke 4 hours. So I was like, I think if I train properly for this, I might be okay. I might be a decent like runner.
Huh. So when we usually leave academic sports, that structure around shorter running kind of disappears. Like there's not a whole lot of, there's not a whole lot of weekly 800 races, right? Instead, you'll find 5Ks, 10Ks, that's on the short side up to half and full marathons.
Right.
So was it just like a competitive drive that you had and that found its place in marathon? Or did you ever feel that you were like truly passionate about marathon running? Because you ended up doing more of it and doing well at it.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. Nobody's ever asked me that before. I think it is hard for like sprinters and field athletes because, generally after you graduate, unless you're a world-class athlete and you get into a club somewhere or you pick up like a major sponsorship like Nike or something like that, you're not going to be doing it after college. So it just disappeared for me. And I did miss the structure. I'm used to, in school, you're balancing academics and you have to, train twice a day and all that stuff. And then it was all of a sudden like work was just my life, that and just going out at night. And there did feel like something was missing. So I did miss the team camaraderie. And that was stuff that I found when I was running and training with people and going to these races. So, and then the competitive side of me, of course, every time I do something like high jump, I was like, can I jump higher? And then with running, it was like, I think I can go faster. How much faster can I get? And then with marathons, once I had some success with that. So the first one was terrible. The second one, I ended up winning the marathon. So then it was like, what can I try next? And it was triathlon.
Yeah. So was it that quick of a transition where you were just like, I want to try now? Or did that take, how long was that time period we're talking about there?
So actually, let me back up a little. I would say that triathlon is what made me a faster runner. So I was trying to do all the mileage, the really long runs, and it left me really beat up. And I wasn't even breaking like 20 minutes in the 5K. I couldn't break 1:30 in the half marathon. And folks, like, this wasn't even that long ago. But then I found when I did a triathlon and I started swimming and biking more, and actually cut back on the mileage, all of a sudden I was running like an 18-minute 5K and I was breaking 1:30. And it was like night and day. It was like as soon as I started incorporating all that, the swimming and the biking was when I saw a huge difference in my run times.
That touches on a question that I wanted to ask you. The runner that you were prior to triathlon to the runner that you are maybe now is probably the best way to say. In which ways are you a better runner? In which ways are you a worse runner, if there are any, now compared to what you were when you were just running?
I can't say worse, like tremendously better. I feel like if I hadn't done I would probably just be kind of at this plateau, just looking for seconds here and there. It actually shocks me how little running my coach has me do during the season because he has me focus on my weaknesses. And I tell him, like, I'm not going to be able to run. Like, I'm going to be so slow because you just have me swim and bike all the time. And then I get in a race and I shock myself and I end up PRing in the run. So it's like, you're grinding it out on the bike and you're using all those muscles and, you're out there cycling for, 5 hours or something. And you still are, working your lungs and stuff like that. So it's not like the run talent just goes away.
Right. And is it fair to say that you would consider yourself, of the three disciplines, a more natural runner, in the sense that that's your natural strength?
Yes, definitely. And
Yeah.
a terrible
So
swimmer.
you and I both, Sika.
Oh,
So,
gosh.
with that, and let's just transition straight into triathlon here. What scared you about it? We already kind of talked about the why, I guess, in the sense that it was another competitive opportunity for you to try something new. And then also the fact that, you probably saw these improvements in your running just because you were not putting in such huge volume. But what scared you about triathlon? Because I'm thinking of somebody listening to this that may be considering that switch to triathlon, but hasn't done it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And maybe there is something that scares them. Maybe it relates to them. But what scared you?
Yeah, I guess there are so many elements of unknown when it comes to triathlon. Like there's so many different between the transitions, like going from swim to bike and then bike to run, making sure that, I don't know, just simple things. Honestly, like, am I going to get a flat tire? What am I going to do? Like in the middle of the race, it's like, am I going to be smart enough to remember all the things I need to do to change the tire? It's like, there are just so many things that could possibly go wrong. And then of course the swim, we start all together packed like sardines, and the gun goes off and everybody's kicking and pushing each other. And, I get worried about spotting, like not seeing the buoy and going off and end up swimming more. So I would say, the morning of the race, I'm always nervous to see what the entire environment's going to be like. Like, is the water going to be choppy? Is there going to be a current? Is it going to rain when I'm on the bike? Am I going to overbike and then get on the run course and my legs are dead? Like, there's just, when I just do one sport, like running, for instance, it's kind of predictable in some ways. You're just doing one thing and there's only really one thing bad that can happen, like with the weather or something like that. But with triathlon, there's so many just different elements.
Have those fears been like reinforced or justified in any way? Or have you found yourself feeling that those fears aren't that justified and you're able to overcome them? What's your relationship with them now that you have experience versus when you first got into it?
I accept that I have no control over what it will be like that day. Before the night before, I'd be like praying, and now I'm just like, okay, what's going to happen? Like, what is the day going to give me? So I've kind of accepted that and embraced that. So, and I think the longer you're in the sport, the more things you experience. So that better prepares you. It's not just like this totally foreign thing that you haven't experienced before.
It is such a dynamic sport like that. And that's a great point, is the more time you can get in that race environment, it's really kind of the only way to get that sort of experience that will allow you to calm down and feel like you have everything in control outside of making those sort of choices, of just focusing on what you can control and doing that. It's just so dynamic. There's so much that can happen when you're swimming, biking, and running, and dealing with a mass start element, then dealing with plenty of other things that come in with that. So yeah, it's tough. What about the training side of things? If we were to compare like your overall volume when you were running, so let's just say that you were doing, 15 hours a week. Did multi-sport have you training more or less in terms of overall volume?
There's nothing like triathlon to me. I mean, you're just training all the time, I feel like. I'm training twice a day, every day, just being a beginner triathlete versus now working with Coach Jonathan Karen. I didn't realize that people train this much. I was a little naive when I first made this goal. When I hired Johnny, I was like, I want you to turn me into an elite athlete. I want to earn my pro card in triathlon. And I didn't necessarily know what went into that. I didn't know that people train twice a day, every day, like 7 days a week. I didn't know that. I thought you still would take a day off. And, I still have, he's like, no, you have to do active recovery. I'm like, well, how about just like no day, like do nothing. So yeah, it's different with, it's more time consuming, I would say, because when you go to the pool, so you have to drive, there's a drive time. With cycling where I live, it's not the most bike friendly. Luckily, I train inside a lot, but on the weekends, I have to drive out to the country and do my really long rides out there. So I would say it's more time consuming. And then because I focus on the half iron distance, I have to put in a lot more mileage versus if I was doing like a sprint or Olympic. So a lot of cycling.
Sure. Let's talk about the cycling then. In that respect, that was one of your big barriers coming in too. I assume coming from a running background, not having experience in tri bikes. Even if you're a cyclist or a mountain biker listening to this, triathlon bikes, they're different beasts. There's so many different things to know about. Everything's integrated. Everything's pretty complex, and the fit matters so much. And then the helmets are different, and there's a lot to keep track of. When you started out with cycling, where were you at, like in terms of FTP? I don't know if you remember that. And
140.
140. Got it. And how tall are you actually, to give people
That's
like a point
lie.
of reference?
Oh, sure. So I'm 5'10". I'm pretty thin. I'm pretty lean. So I don't know, probably like 130 right now, 135 at the most. But I did not have a background in cycling at all. I don't think I even learned how to bike, my dad says, until I was like 11. So I wasn't even one of those kids outside playing on a bike. I literally had no cycling background whatsoever until the day I decided to do a triathlon. And
Wow.
I went and got a mountain bike at Dick's. Yeah. That's how I started. So yeah, I had no skill sets whatsoever. When I did decide that I wanted to get more competitive, I met Dan Empfield, who is a mutual friend of ours. He runs slowtwitch.com, and he invented the first triathlon wetsuit, and he's great about bike fits and stuff like that. He's seen me, he's seen some pictures of me on the bike that I had. He was like, "Your fit is completely wrong." At the time, I hadn't broken 3 hours in the half Ironman on the bike. So I can literally run a marathon faster than I could bike. So just to put that in perspective.
Your run split was shorter than your bike split.
Yes, I could run a marathon faster. That's how bad I was. And I didn't know how to use power, never used power before, didn't have a power meter or anything like that. And he was like, well, TrainerRoad's a relatively new app. So this was 2017. I'm not even sure how long you guys have been around, but
yeah. We've been, really since about 2013, I guess now. Yeah. Which is crazy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. So this was 2017. So he connected me with TrainerRoad, and I did the FTP test. It was 140. He was like, "I don't believe it. Your FTP isn't 140." Until I went out there to ride with him, and he fit me to my bike, and we did. I showed him what my power was like, and he was like, "Oh wow, we really got to work on this. You really need to put together a plan." So yeah, I started training with it, and I finally broke 3 hours. My time dropped pretty fast. Yep, it did. It dropped really fast. And then, so I think a combination of training, like structured training, using power, and then the fit that I had, the combination of the three, I saw rapid improvement. Yeah.
Something that's interesting on the fit side of things, most or a lot of triathletes, when they come into things, they have some level of experience on a road bike, usually coming into it when they get a triathlon bike, like the tri bike or TT bike comes in after they've had probably a significant amount of time on a road bike. Right. Granted, there are tons of outliers here. I'm just generalizing, but in your case, you really didn't have a whole lot of time on a normal road bike before the TT bike. What was that like, getting used to the TT position? Because it's such a foreign experience to ride a bike like that for somebody that's used to it. But maybe in your case, since you didn't have a point of reference.
It's the opposite. I have a road bike now, and it feels weird holding myself up. I feel like I'm like, this is so weird. I want to be like down in TT. So I probably have the opposite experience. Oftentimes I have my time trial on my trainer. Yeah.
How interesting.
So I would say I actually prefer my time trial bike.
That would be, I wish that I preferred and maybe I'll get to that once we do triathlon. I guess in 2 years, I'm going to be focusing on triathlon. At that point, I'll probably end up having, or I hope I get to the point where I prefer my TT bike. Cause right now I look at that thing and I just I get the chills. So thinking of riding it. So, so what about, I guess, getting into your specific process of improvement? There are a lot of things like you mentioned on the bike. It was the bike fit, training with power, structured interval training, those sort of things helped you. But I kind of want to get into your internal process. Your rate of improvement, I would say, relatively speaking, to a lot of people is pretty rapid. And I would venture a guess that you have some sort of internal processes that you manage, like your whether it's a growth mindset and what you do, but what do you think makes you improve quickly, or how do you accelerate your improvement at an activity like swimming or like riding a bike where you don't have a lot of experience?
Yeah, consistency. I would say consistency. And as my coach says, learning how to hurt. Like he would look at my files and he's like, you're down here. You need to, that hill workout you had, you're supposed to be hitting the watts up here. And I'm like, oh no, but it hurts so bad. He's like, that's the point. You got to like get used to that. So I would say, yeah, consistency and really just grinding it out and being okay with failing. Like for some reason, for the longest, I would get so nervous before workouts, even run workouts. I would get nervous that I wasn't going to be able to get through the interval. And he's like, okay, so if you don't get through it, like, it's okay. Like you just reset and then you get through the next one. So yeah, the mind, it's like the mind is everything.
Yeah. That's a great point. That fear that a lot of us have prior to workouts, and it doesn't even have to be necessarily like a particularly frightening workout, but it seems like you have pretty high standards for yourself and you want to fulfill those. How about dealing with the discouragements that come when you're not where you want to be? You've mentioned this, and we'll get into your injury, the severe crash that you had and everything else. But I remember even reading a point where you were very worried that you wouldn't be able to live up to the athlete that you wanted to be as a result of that. So kind of externalizing from that and just in a principle-based approach, how do you deal with discouragement while being a person that has such high expectations for yourself?
Not well. No, it's taken years, I would say, to look at everything as like a learning opportunity. Like even if you have a bad race, there's so much that you can take from it to the next one. And I also feel like, hopefully, knock on wood, there will always be another race or another workout. So it's like, okay, just because I didn't crush this one. And then also looking at where I am in my training, like it might be a week where I'm just like really fatigued and, I work a full-time job. So it's like, if I have meetings and I'm staying up late and stuff like that, that might be a reason why, that workout didn't go as well. So like looking at the whole picture instead of just looking at it like, oh, you failed, like you didn't hit the power numbers that you were supposed to, or he told me to hold this pace and I didn't. So just like my environment, I mean, I'm a female, where am I at physically that month? Honestly, there's just so many different factors, and every workout isn't going to be like an A+ workout. Like you're supposed to also struggle through the workouts and they make you stronger. Like the ones where you almost gave up and it was crappy, but you still finished, like those are the workouts that you really need to take the confidence from.
Kind of like store it up, right? And build a bank account with those things just piling in there.
Yes.
On the swim side of things, what has been the most significant contributor to your improvement in the swim?
Have I improved? The struggle is real. It's still a work in progress. The biggest improvement I saw was I went from training completely on my own at the pool to joining a master swim group. I haven't done it this year, but previously I was meeting with the master swim team. We were meeting, I had to get up at like 4:45 a.m.
They always meet so early. I don't know what the deal is.
The club teams, they're already in the pool swimming by the time I get there, these kids, and then they're back there again in the evenings. I'm like, more power to you. So yeah, swimming in a group, being forced to like keep up. There was a coach on deck, so somebody actually looking at me and critiquing my form. Those little things helped a lot. Also for me, not just doing just freestyle, just swimming, like actually having workouts, like my coach, having me do sets and like learning how to look at the clock and forcing myself to go on, the 140 or the 150 or whatever else for 100. So, I think swimming with the group helped a ton.
Yeah, swimming with a group and structure. I mean, structure is just such a huge thing in all things, really, not just athletics. But
yeah.
So looking at this, your why and your goal, one of the goals that you have here is to be the first Black woman to hold a pro card, which is super cool. And I think if I've seen correctly that, it's not super cool, I should say that is an achievement because it unfortunately is. But at the same time, really cool that you are the trailblazer in this regard. With that said, though, I believe that the sport of triathlon is like 0.5% or Black. Is that correct?
African Americans.
My goodness.
I know.
Yeah, so that I think, and I don't know because I don't know the demographic data, but I believe that is even more so than cycling, perhaps. So, regardless, the situation is what it is here, right? And I want to focus on that in particular. So why do you think the sport is so entirely one-sided or lopsided? Perhaps is a better way to say it in that regard. Why don't we have? Why aren't there more people of color that are doing triathlon? From your perspective.
Right. And this question gets posed to me a lot, and it's something that I talk about a lot. And it's a loaded question, a loaded answer. I could sit here all day talking about the ifs, ands, whys, buts, why it is the way it is. So I'll just stick to what I think are primarily the factors. Number one, the swim. The first leg in the triathlon. Only about 64% of African Americans, actually 64% of African Americans lack basic swim skills. Wow. So if you throw them in the deep end, they most likely will need to get saved. So if you can't swim, you can't do a triathlon, right? So it discourages people from trying out in the sport. Like, I grew up swimming, and it's still scary for me, just being in the open water. So that's a huge factor. It's an expensive sport. Cycling's an expensive sport. So, that's just it's not only applicable to people of color. It applies to everybody. If you don't have the finances, that's hard to make it work. But also the awareness. Most people think that triathlon is just Ironman. They don't realize that there are short distances and sprints and, pool try. And so with, I would say people of color, like, Black, brown people, we focus on mainstream sports like basketball and football, easy access. We have the money. We don't need to go and pay to take swim lessons at the YMCA. And so it's financial. It's the lack of swim skills, and then the reason behind that, and we don't really need to go into all of this since this is just, we're sticking to sports. But for me, I believe systemic racism is real. A lot of my family members can't swim, and it's because, their grandparents didn't learn how to swim because they weren't allowed to swim at the pools. They were segregated, and the only way that they can go in the water was to go to like a stream or a lake or something where there weren't lifeguards, and the drowning rates were really high. So they were scared to tell their kids to, go to swim. So it kind of got passed down generation to generation. So I would say that in a nutshell.
Yeah, like you said, it's a super complex issue, and one that's also, you can see like that effect that over decades of where that leads, and it won't be fixed in one day to the next, but that shouldn't discourage any of us from trying to do our part to contribute to positive change, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so I view your example here as such a powerful one, and an athlete that's just like, yeah, I don't know how to, because you weren't some person that's like, oh, I already know how to ride a bike really well, and I already know how to swim really well, so I'll just go into this triathlon thing and be a leader. You're really jumping into something that takes a ton of courage, and you're putting yourself out there, and you're doing something that I find really inspiring, and I hope that's inspiring other people, and I'm sure it is. But what can we do? What can I do as an individual that loves triathlon? I don't do it yet. We'll do it soon. We'll see if I love it when I actually do it. But what can I do as a person in the endurance sports community, avid cyclist, everything else like that? What can I do to help the sport be more inclusive? Maybe help increase racial representation. What would you say to me asking you that question as I am right now?
I think you're doing it. We use the term amplifying Black voices, like giving us a platform. It's not like we don't exist, and we do have our story to tell. And I think image is really important. Representation is really important. I remember when I was little, I idolized Dominique Dawes, the gymnast. At the time, there weren't that many Black gymnasts, especially at that level. And then, of course, now we have Simone Biles and Gabby Douglas, and she kind of paved that way. So, with Serena Williams, she really stood out, in Venus Williams, but now we have, so many Coco I don't even know her last name. I'm not that focused on tennis, but there's so many more now. So it's like about paving the way and like seeing somebody that looks like you. So I think it is important to have a platform, to be on the cover of magazines and, so kids can see that there are people that look like them doing these incredible things. I was lucky enough to speak before COVID. I was speaking at a few elementary schools earlier in the year. And, cool. It was awesome. They had no idea what like an Ironman was. I brought my time trial bike in. They'd never seen anything like that. They'd never seen a wetsuit before. So like, these were in schools in the inner cities, predominantly Black. And, they had never seen anything like that before. So, and then they're seeing me, somebody that looks like them telling my story. So, I think it's really important to like, let us speak and not, just, another Black story or something like that, like writing it off because this is reality. This is my reality.
Yeah. As a person that, and perhaps I don't know if this gets into any experience you have with cycling. We hear about it a lot because the group ride is so common in cycling and it's a common learning environment for a lot of cyclists. And unfortunately, they're also in many cases not welcoming, not friendly, adversarial, and stereotypically dominated by white males in their 40s. An intimidating place for a huge amount of people. So, and in the triathlon world, there's perhaps not quite as much, like it's that group ride is not necessarily part of the core experience quite as much, but what can the listeners do that are listening to this, that are participants? Maybe they don't have the opportunity to amplify Black voices and to share those stories, even though all of us probably can share it within our own networks and help in that regard, but what can they do to help the sport be more inclusive?
I'm so lucky that I didn't have those experiences. That's how I started riding outdoors, actually, was with a group, and I was on a time trial bike and they're all on road bikes, and I didn't really know what I was doing, but they were still like, come out, like, come ride with us. Some of them I would get dropped and a few of them would stop and, wait for me to catch back up. So I know people have their workouts and they're like, cutthroat, like we got to stick to this pace and stuff, but there are people who would quit if they didn't have, somebody kind of mentoring them. Like I'm so lucky that I've just had wonderful mentors through this sport. Like being introduced to TrainerRoad, it was because of Dan Emfield and a white guy. And at the bike shop, Connie and Walt, both Caucasian people, and they're like, come out to this group ride. We'll make sure that, somebody stays back with you and stuff. So it's just like being patient, being open. I hear that a lot sometimes about how intimidating the group rides are. And I couldn't imagine if that was my introduction to the sport, I probably would have quit. So
it makes me think a lot of the time I honestly avoid the local group ride because of those things. And maybe that's the wrong perspective. Maybe instead I should just participate and just hopefully be a helpful person to somebody that's there. Could be, it could make the difference. Who knows, right? The seemingly minimal act on our end can actually be something quite impactful for somebody else.
And then I would also add one more thing is don't, what's the word? Don't assume. I had a few times early on. I've used this in my first Ironman 70.3 World Championships. The women raced Saturday and the men raced Sunday. And so I raced Saturday, was spectating the men's race Sunday. And I was talking to this guy, he had a dog, and he was like, "Oh, are you a volunteer?" And I'm like, "No, I raced the World Championships yesterday." So, and I've had few instances like that. And it's like, just don't assume just based on the way somebody looks. Let them tell your story or let them tell their story. So just don't make assumptions.
That's a great general rule, right? If we all form assumptions in our minds, that's how our brains work, but there's never any reason to externalize them. Instead, we can just ask and let people tell us all about what they are, rather than and who they are and everything else. So the pro card, I want to focus on this here because it is really impactful to be the first Black woman to hold the pro card here. But the reason I think that it's really so tough too is because so don't want this to come off the wrong way to cyclists, but in many cases with cycling, you can reach like mountain biking, for example, you can become a Cat 1 depending on the area that you're in, just by asking, right? And it's pretty easy to do. And then you can also just become a pro mountain biker pretty relatively easy, or pro cyclist. In some cases, it can be relatively easy. Sure, you still have to move up and go through the process, but can you explain the requirement to be able to get a pro card? Like, how good do you have to be, or what do you have to do to get a pro card in triathlon?
Yeah, it's so hard now. The rules definitely changed. Sometimes I'm like, gosh, why didn't I find this sport like right after college, or like back in 2010 when it was so much easier? But whatever, I have to work for it. So every country has their own set of rules, and ours is governed by USA Triathlon. So every year they put out the rules that you need to, in order to qualify for your pro card, what you have to accomplish. So, and it generally doesn't change now. It stays the same. So it could be top 10 overall amateur at Kona, the IRONMAN World Championships. Oh. That would qualify. Yeah, top 10 overall amateur. I'm like, oh my goodness, really? Another one, the one that I had been focusing on last year was top 3 amateur overall at an elite qualifying race. So it would be a race where there's a pro field, prize purse of 20 grand or more, and the field, I think it has to be like at least 500 athletes, and you have to come in the top 3. So it's pretty tough. And some athletes do qualify and they don't take their pro card and they continue racing in the amateur ranks. So, you could still do really well. The last half iron I did, I came in 6th, and I missed it by like 3-4 minutes. And there were a couple girls ahead of me that have actually qualified, but they continue to race. And hey, you got to do what makes you happy. So it's no knock on them. But yeah, so it's difficult. It really is difficult.
Yeah, that's a really tough achievement to line up against it requires it to be a stacked field. It requires it to be really tough. I want to get into your crash that you had. So walk us through, when was the crash, like at what race, and then what actually caused the crash, to your best recollection, of course, because those are chaotic times when we think back on the crash.
Yeah, so it was last year. It was April 2019, and I flew down to Texas to do Galveston, Texas, to do Ironman 70.3 Texas. My goal was to earn my pro card at that race, so I wanted to finish top 3. And unfortunately, the way every race director, they can decide if they want it to be a rolling start where you line up fastest to slowest, gets in the water and goes, or it can be an age group wave start. And unfortunately, I got an age group wave start race, and I had to go like last. And I was nervous, and they don't publish that until a couple weeks beforehand. So had I known that, I wouldn't have done that race. But those were the hands that those were the cards that I was dealt. So I waited to go. By the time I got out the water, I got on the bike course, and it was really crowded. I remember that. I remember having to navigate people. So, because there were so many, I think that the race is like 2,000 people or something. Wow. And when you are in one of those last waves, sometimes you're behind people who they're new. It's their first half Ironman, because I've been there. It's their first half Ironman. Sometimes they're on a mountain bike. They're just like they're there to get a participant award. They might not know the rules of the road, like right on the right, pass on the left, just stuff like that. So I was behind those people, and I was aggressive. I had the wind on my back. I had to just squeal. I was going like 27 miles per hour. The next thing I remember was waking up in the ER hours later. Oh. Yep. I was completely knocked out. I had broken my nose. My teeth were all loose. My face was completely lacerated. They were stitching it back together, and I was trying to understand what happened. I thought I had been in a car accident on the way home from the race. I remember like being naked under a sheet, and I'm like, what happened to my kit? I learned that they cut my brand new custom kit off. I was really upset. Apparently they told me I was very upset about that. I was drugged up, but I was very upset that they cut my kit. So I later found out that I was going fast, and there were competitors in front of me, and one person swerved to go around somebody else, but they didn't look and they didn't see that I was coming. Oh. And there was nothing I could do. So I swerved to avoid them. I didn't hit them, but I hit the median in the road that was keeping us from traffic, and I just flew into the ground, like almost 30 miles per hour, face forward. My helmet saved my life, but I had a visor. It pretty much shattered in my face, and that's what completely lacerated my face. Yeah. So it's the funny thing is, like with Garmin data, I when I was able to, I uploaded my watch and it showed me like going 27 miles per hour. Then all of a sudden it stops. And then it was only like 7 or 8 minutes that I must have been laying there, because all of a sudden I'm going like 60 miles per hour. So I was like, okay, I was in the ambulance at that point. And then it goes dead. I was like, all right, I guess I was in the hospital at that point. So yeah, wow. It was crazy.
So with that sort of, and the injuries were substantial, and actually we'll probably in post here, some pictures will pop up so people can see what you were enduring. How long did it take? Oh, actually, first things first, were you even concerned with how long it would take you to get back into racing again, or was it?
When I saw what I looked like, I asked them for a mirror. The doctors were like, we don't advise that. So I asked for my cell phone and I started taking selfies. I started looking at the camera to understand what was going on. And I just couldn't believe how messed up I was. It was just shocking. So no, I mean, my first thought was I quit. Like, I'm never doing this again. This is just absolutely insane. I was single at the time. So I'm like, I'm going to be single the rest of my life. Like, nobody's going to want me. And, it's scary. You're a woman in your 30s and now all of a sudden you're just like, you have road rash everywhere. And I ended up developing infections. I had to take antibiotics. When I left, I had to get oral surgery because, my mouth was so messed up. So there were a lot of things to consider. But surprisingly, when only a few days later, after I left the hospital, I flew straight to my parents and I had to stay with them because I couldn't take care of myself. But 2 things happened. My dad asked me, said, if you knew this was going to happen, but you were still going to get your pro card, would you go through with all this? And I didn't hesitate. I was like, oh, absolutely. Like that would still mean the world to me. And then the other thing was, I was lucky enough that I have so many wonderful friends and family and, companies that were supporting me, and they sent cards and flowers, and in the mail, I got cards from little kids, like hand-drawn cards. They like shaded the female athlete black and stuff. And they were like, feel better, Sika. Like, you're so great. And we hope to see you racing again and stuff like that. So it was like, oh my God, like they're kids that actually have been following my story that want to see me come back. Like, okay, this is proof that, representation and image is important. So at that moment I decided, like 3 days after my crash, and I signed up for Ironman 70.3 Augusta.
Wow. Well, I just have to take what a great dad to keep in mind the why of his daughter. Because I'm sure as a dad, that just absolutely terrified him to know that his daughter was that hurt. And then to know that she has this goal that could probably could very well put her in that position to be risked again, or I should say face that sort of risk again. And for him to then keep in mind what matters most to his daughter and then to help keep you on track. That's just really cool parenthood. As a dad, hearing that's like something that I would strive to achieve for. So way to go, Dad. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Of course, my mom was scared to death. Like, don't encourage us. She's like, I love you. I'm going to let you be you and do what you need to do. And she was the one that really helped me the most, like driving me to every appointment. I mean, I was very emotional. It was hard. My dad tried to make things light, like, you look like you won a few rounds with Mike Tyson and stuff like that. And, meanwhile, my mom's like, this is not funny. Like, we need to fix her. So it was good having both sides, Yeah.
Between that and the motivation of the kids, that's awesome. So Galveston, Augusta, the one that you registered for after that, that's where so what sort of nerves were you facing getting back onto the bike, going through the whole process? That had to have been just because, and it's almost worse maybe in some ways that you didn't remember it. Maybe it's better. I don't know, but
I think better. Because I thought I'd been in a car accident initially, that was what I had nightmares about. I was nervous driving. Like the first time I drove, my hands were literally shaking. When I got on a bike, it was completely different. I still never really, I knew that's what caused it because that was what I was told, but I don't remember it being from the bike. And honestly, I was so desperate to be active again. I couldn't wait to like ride and like, you go from being in the best shape of your life, going to this race, like, oh my God, I might get my pro card, to all of a sudden you're like just learning how to do simple things again. And, like my coach let me, I think about a week or so after I went to the track with my mom, and I just walked 4 laps slowly around the track. And then I like slept the rest of the day. I was so tired. So just like the desperation of like wanting to be an athlete and be active, and like I was so used to training twice a day and working on top of it, having all these things going on to, I'm dealing with a concussion, and the blinds are drawn and my teeth were loose. I had a splint in my mouth, so I couldn't eat solid food for like a month, and I just like wanted some normalcy. So that was really hard, just like being, having this wonderful life 1 minute, and then all of a sudden, like, just feeling like your life is over.
So getting back into training was almost like a return from normalcy and a way to kind of leave that period behind for you?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like having goals again, like I always, even now with COVID and not being able to race, I don't know if you saw, I did a 50K run. I've never done an ultra before. Like I need something on my schedule. I need a reason why, like something to work towards. So for me, coming back was like, okay, I have Augusta. I have 5 months to get ready for this race. So like I can gradually, build and build and build. So like I need something there, like a reason for why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So with Augusta being your goal, that's how did it go? Tell us that.
Yeah. Okay. So 2 months after the crash, I'm still kind of like bandaged up. There was a Rev 3 race, Rev 3 Montclair right outside of DC. It was a sprint triathlon. I registered for that. Like still kind of banged up. I told my mom, I'm like, Mom, I just registered for a triathlon. She's like, you did what? She like hopped on the Amtrak. She met me down there. She was so scared. But I had this new Cervelo bike and head wheels, and I was like, and I got to put my new kit on, and I was nervous, but like excited to see what was going to happen. And I shocked myself and I won the women's race.
Wow.
So I was like, okay, I am kind of back. Like my fitness is kind of there. I'm competitive. But between that and Augusta, definitely roller coaster up and down. Like some days I would feel like physically great, like I could do it, but mentally I just felt like wiped out. Like, why am I doing this? And then there were other times where mentally I felt great, but my body was just like trying to still recover. So it wasn't just like linear, like, oh, all of a sudden, I get to Augusta and it was great. It was a lot of hard work between that and Augusta. But yeah, when I got to Augusta, I was nervous as hell. I still was crazy. And even though it was 5 months after the crash, I'm like, I still want to get my pro card. Like, I'm going to go all out. And I was close. Like I had the fastest female amateur run split, so I made up a lot of time. But the thing that I noticed most, and Dan was actually really proud of this, I had a crappy swim. I was like 120th or something, but I rode my way into 30th place, and I've never done that before. Yeah, that was like by far the best I've ever biked in my life. So yeah, I biked, and then I ran my way into 6th. So if I had came in top 3, so if I had been like 3-4 minutes faster overall, I would have gotten my pro card, but it didn't happen. So.
That's what way to come back, though. That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Does the crash still affect you in any negative or perhaps even positive ways? Do you notice, does it play a role in your performance, whether it's training, racing, mindset?
Yeah. I was on a group ride about a month or 2 ago, and a friend crashed right in front of me, and it was pretty bad. He had a lot of road rash. Yeah. And that freaked me out.
Yeah.
And then it kind of brought back feelings like, oh my gosh, that could happen again. That can so easily happen again. So yeah, it definitely is in the back of my mind. I still look at cycling as kind of dangerous. I'm like, this doesn't happen with running. You don't end up on like concussed and like, trying to rebuild your leg. That does not happen. And even Nate, I saw that he took a terrible spill, and his face was all banged up. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I don't know how much this is worth it. So I still go back and forth with that. I'm grateful that we can ride indoors. I love that that's an option, that I don't always have to like be at risk riding outside, to be honest with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So even though you didn't get your pro card there at Augusta, you did get a Kona qualification spot, which was how many weeks after?
I raced Augusta, and then I raced Kona 2 weeks later.
So, and had you done a full distance race?
No, I never done a full Ironman. So my first Ironman experience was at the IRONMAN World Championships in Hawaii. Yeah, crazy.
Wow. Like, and for those that don't know, I mean, all that they're very close to the same distance, if not the same exact distance when you're talking about a full distance, full Ironmans. But Kona is just really particularly hard. Number one, the field. It's a world championship field. So the people that are there are like you, really fast athletes. So they could absolutely, the age groupers that are there in many cases could be pro, and they're competitive with pros. So
yes,
it's almost like a pro field, even though there are age groupers there. It's more or less a gigantic pro field. It's really tough.
Right.
And then the conditions on the course are just really tough. You'd heard of the heat, I'm sure. You probably heard of the wind. But what was your first impression when you experienced it?
It's nothing like you could possibly imagine. I had no idea. You watch it on NBC and it's like, oh, it's so pretty. And you see the water in the background and they talk about the wind. But I didn't know wind existed like that until I went out there. You hear about the energy lab, like running on the Queen K to the energy lab, and the energy lab is where, like the solar panels are and stuff. And it's just completely desolate. It's so hot. You're just like, the sun's beating down on you. And the run is my strength, and my behind was walking through the energy lab. Like, it's so hard. The climbing, people talk about the climb to Hawi. It's like a 16-mile climb up, and you're dealing with crosswinds. I actually did get knocked over. Crosswind hit me.
No.
40 miles into the race. I was like, 1 minute I'm in time trial, and the next my bike is like out and I'm on the floor and my bottles are everywhere. And luckily this guy, he was a competitor. He stopped and he actually helped me pick up my stuff. And he's like, you want me to flag down? And I was like, you want me to flag down an emergency vehicle? And I'm like, no, I'm finishing this damn race. I've had a crazy year. Like, I'm finishing. So it's insane. And even the way the wind is, at some points it's sort of on your back on the side. So you're like, okay, maybe when I turn around at Hawi, I'll have a no, it's still headwind. You're like pedaling really hard just to get down the hill. There's absolutely nothing like that race. I wanted to, pretty much when I got off the bike, I wanted to drop out. Like, when I went in the tent and the lady's like, are you okay? And I'm like, not really. I don't want to run a marathon. Yeah. There's nothing like Kona.
It's like, I can't imagine going through that after all that you have been through that year. And then to have that crash on the bike again, like on that course, and then going through that. What made you get through that? You mentioned in that moment when you're sitting in the tent and you're probably feeling very discouraged, somewhat afraid of also probably failing and going through everything there. What was that like? What made you get out of that tent and go through transition to get out on the run?
I am very public when I'm doing races and stuff. Like, after my crash, I put my pictures out there and I was like, I'm still going to Augusta and I'm going to try to get my pro card. And then when I was going to Kona, I'm like, I'm going to race the IRONMAN World Championships and finish. So I had family and friends tracking me, and I thought about that. I'm like, I can't quit. My dad flew out to Hawaii to spend the week with me, and he was outside of the tent. I'm like, okay, he's going to get really worried if I don't come out. So it was a few of those things. And then also I saw Roderick Sewell. I don't know if you know him. He's a double amputee. He was the first guy, below the knee. Was it above the knee? Might be above the knee, double amputee. And he was the first to finish. But I saw him when I was riding back into town, and he was on the push rims heading out, and it looked just so hard, but he had this look of determination on his face. Like, I'm going to finish this race no matter what. And I remember thinking, like, there was no doubt in his mind that he was going to finish. So I'm like, okay, this guy who, is double amputee, and I would think doing the push rim thing would be way harder. The fact that he was out there doing it, I'm like, I need to get my butt out of this tent. So I did. And I'm glad I did.
Yeah, I'm sure that the experience of even just watching and spectating at Kona, and everyone should go to that race. It's such an incredible, and hopefully we get this race back with everything that's going on. But it's such an incredibly moving experience because it is such a physically hard thing. Every Ironman's really hard. Every half Ironman's really hard. But the circumstances of that race, it genuinely will bring you to tears as you spectate, even just going through and seeing. It really moves you. It's emotional to see what the athletes go through. How was the run for you? Because that run, not enough. I think a lot of people talk about the bike, but they don't talk about the run. They talk about the energy lab, but there's so much like up and down and steep and extremely humid, and then extremely like dry and hot, like you feel like you're in an oven. How'd the run go?
Yeah. So I said to myself, I'm like, okay, even if I have to walk this marathon, like I'm just going to finish. So I started walking out the tent, but because everybody's so talented and world class there, it was like everybody was constantly moving. I remember
Mhm.
that. I thought it was insane on the bike. So if you like, let's take Ironman Maryland, for instance, there'll be beginners there. So there'll be people who stop at the aid stations and get bananas and stop and drink, use the bathroom. That doesn't happen at Kona. Everybody just keeps going. Like they're handing out bottles and you're like riding, like just grabbing them. Even at the turnaround, like your the special needs bag that you put together your food and everything. I said to myself, okay, I'm going to stop and I'm going to like, check everything, whatever, when I get to the turnaround. But everybody just kept going. So I'm like, okay. So I grabbed the bag and I'm like trying to do it like as I'm riding. So you're just looking at all these world-class athletes, because people don't realize, like, even if you don't, like if you qualify from, I think you have to do like 10 Ironmans or something, and then you get put in a lottery system. So even the people who are older and they're there, they've still done a lot of Ironmans. Like they know what they're doing. So everybody is really talented. So, yeah, like I was looking at everybody when I went out and run, and the few females that were in front of me, they started slowly jogging. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to do what they do. And then my legs started to come around and I started running pretty fast, probably too fast. I got excited, as most people do. You're in town, you're on a lead drive, everybody's there. There's helicopters and cameras, and the top men are coming back. So it's just like, it's chaotic. It's so
Crazy
awesome.
energy. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm like running entirely way too fast. My coach sees me. He's like, slow down. I'm like, I'm good. And then you get to Palani, and Palani is just like crazy grade, like just a mountain that you have to run up. And if you were feeling good before then, by the time you get to the top, your legs are kind of shot. And then you're on the Queen K and you're away from town, and there's not spectators up there. There are only aid stations. It's desolate, completely quiet, no shade whatsoever. You're just like kind of running on this highway through the lava fields and questioning your sanity. um, By the time I got to 17, I was feeling it pretty bad. And by the time I got to the energy lab, you see people puking on the side of the road. You start seeing some of the emergency vehicles, like, maybe I should take a ride back to town. And it was really hard, but my time was like 3 hours and 37 minutes. So it's like,
Nice.
okay, that was pretty decent considering everything that I went through. And then of course it was like the most emotional experience, me crossing that finish line and like seeing my dad up in the stands and everything that we had been through that year, to know like we did it. Like I didn't even feel like I did it. It's like we did this. So awesome experience.
How cool. And what a great thing that you were able to do that race on such short notice. But it's like a dream of mine to ever be a good enough athlete to qualify for Kona. I don't think that would ever happen. But I'll always be there every year because it's such a cool experience and it motivates me so much in all other aspects of life. So,
yeah.
So Sika, I guess the pro card is still the goal, right? But what's next for you? Pending that we have races and everything else, assuming that we do.
Yeah. So I did a pretend like a virtual race. I did 50K with a friend the other week, and we went through the marathon in like 3:09, and then I was just like, oh my god, it's such a terrible experience. But we finished in 3 hours and 45 minutes. So I was like, okay, I'm pretty fit. So there's a race I was able to get into, a marathon, and that's in 3 weeks. I have actually never broken 3 hours for the marathon. My PR is 3 hours and 6 seconds. So my goal is to finally get under sub 3. Yeah. So I'm racing that in 3 weeks. And then I'm praying, knock on wood, that the races, the triathlons that I had registered for last year to get my pro card, I'm hoping that they go off in 2021. So my first crack at it will be in Mexico, Cancun, like the end of April. And then I'll also be doing Ironman 70.3 Eagleman in Cambridge, Maryland. So yeah, those are the 2 big races the first half of the year that hopefully I can qualify.
That's exciting. We'll be cheering and watching. Where can people follow you, Sika, get in touch with you and maybe ask you some questions, but certainly follow your racing?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm super active on Instagram. I post there all the time. Every time I race, I post. So my handle is at Sika Henry, SIKHenry. I do have a website that I try to keep updated. It's sikahenry.com, and I post all my race results there. And also my blog, which was how so many people knew about my crash and saw the photos. No matter how good or bad I race or how messed up I look, I post everything on my blog. So you can get to that through my website as well.
Awesome. And then in terms of inclusivity in the sport and racial representation, you also work with Black Triathletes Org, right? Is that
yeah,
correct?
I'm part of the Black Triathletes Association group.
Awesome.
But I do a lot of just kind of stuff on my own. Like I get approached a lot by when I spoke at the schools, elementary school kids, it was because a guy who was part of the public school system out there, he was coordinating having different speakers, talk to schools where kids weren't showing up and they needed some, inspiration and encouragement and stuff like that. So he reached out to me. So I would say a lot of the things that I end up doing. Recently, I spoke on a panel for diversity in aquatics at their annual meeting. I did that virtually. So for the most part, it's people reaching out to me. So, if you are somehow involved in like charity work or anything like that, I'm definitely like into talking to kids and, just like lending my helping hand whenever I can. So,
Awesome.
yeah, you can reach me through my website. Yep.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Sika. I appreciate this. And if you're listening to this, we're also going to be doing an Ask a Cycling Coach episode, the other podcast, with you as the guest host with myself and Amber Pierce, which is going to be an awesome episode. So you can find that as well. Once that's posted, we'll have it down in the description below if you're checking this after the published date. And you can get even more advice from Sika, which will be awesome. So thanks, Sika. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. Yep, definitely.